Hi, I'm Kimmy with On William Street, and we are here to help you become a more confident quilter, from the piecing to the quilting and everything in between. So this week we are back and ready to sew our first 3 blocks for our quilt along together. So don't forget, everything that we're going to talk about today is also on the blog post. So we'll have the measurements and kind of the layouts drawn out for you, so you can see those a little bit easier if it's a little bit harder to follow along. We'll have them in both places. So go and check that out. Also, while you are there, don't forget to check out our shop and find your next modern quilting project. So let's go ahead and get started. So we have the first 3 blocks that we are going to be working with, and these are going to go across the top of our quilt. And the first thing we're going to need to do is trim these down, but some of them are going to be trimmed a little bit different. So make sure that you're paying attention to what block you're working with so that we trim it correctly, because we're going to leave a border on the outside of our blocks so that we have a little bit of a border to match the sashing in between. All right, so I pulled out the first block that we started with. This is the one we quilted in January, and it's going to go in the top left corner of the quilt. So what we need to do is we need the top and the side to be a little bit bigger than these 2 sides. These 2 are going to be connected to blocks. These 2 are going to be the border. So if you have a couple sides on your block that are a little bit smaller, make sure to save them for these sections. So we need 2 of them to be trimmed to 1 3/4 inches. So my backing isn't quite the distance of my batting here. So I'm just kind of looking through to make sure that this side has the full 1 3/4 inches that we want. And then I'm going to go ahead and trim it down all the way along the block. So you're going to trim your batting and your backing. And I think I am perfect, just good there. And then I'm going to turn it, and I'm going to trim this side as well. So remember, the top and the left side are the ones that we want to be that 1 3/4 inches. And then on the remaining 2, the bottom and the right side, those can be trimmed down to 1 inch past your block. So I'm going to go, if I have had a little bit of movement on my block, like if I line this up on the 2 corners, you can see some movement here. I'm going to go to make sure that I'm going from the corner to the corner. If I have extra hanging out here, that's fine. It's going to get covered up in the sashing. So I want to make sure that I don't have any cutting in here. So I want to go from the shortest point so that we don't have anything that gets missed when we do the sashing. And this is going to give us a 2-inch sashing, finished sashing in between the blocks. And then on this bottom side, I'm going to do the same thing, and I want to go 1 inch past my block. Also trying to keep everything nice and square as I'm trimming this as well. All right, so then for the middle block number 2, the middle top, I just need one side to be that 1 3/4 inches. So you can kind of check and see if there's one that's a little bit bigger than the rest, and trim it down. And then all 3 other sides will be connected to another block. So those, I just need to trim all of them off at 1 inch. See here, you can see I've got a little bit on the inside, so I'm just going to bump that down just a little bit, to make sure that I've got the full, that I'm coming in and getting the inch from that shortest point. And then on the final block, now we want the top and the right side are going to be mine. So I'm going to use these two. And those are going to be my big ones. And then the left side and the bottom will be the 1 inch. So now that all of the blocks are trimmed, we're going to go ahead and grab our sashing. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take one side of this, I'm going to go over to the ironing board, and I'm just going to fold it up 1/4 inch because this seam is going to be sewn just from the top, not underneath, because we won't be able to get to the underneath. So I'm just going to fold over 1/4 inch on one side on both of our sashing. And the sashings are just 2.5 inches by 15.5 inches long. All right, so now that these are ironed, you can see that I've got one side left open and one side with the 1/4 inch rolled under. The last thing we're going to need is a little bit of interfacing, and this is just going to hold the batting together. So this is just some lightweight interfacing, and it's just adhesive on one side, so you don't need it on both sides. And these we want at 1.5 inches by the 15.5 inches. So now we're ready to start putting the blocks together. So starting with the first 2 blocks, making sure that I've got my 2 big sides on the top and on the outside. And then on this one, making sure again that I've got my big side on the top. What I'm going to do is I'm going to just go ahead and fold the batting out of the way. If you want to, you can stick a couple pins in it just to hold that back. If you're good at holding it back without, you don't need them, but I'm going to hold that back out of the way so you can see what I'm doing a little bit better. After I have those pinned back, I'm going to go ahead and put them together, and I'm just going to sew just the backs, just with 1/4 inch like we were doing anything else. So I'm going to go ahead and sew just the backs together 1/4 inch all the way along that seam. So after I have that sewn together, and now I'm going to go ahead and I just pressed that seam to one side. Then I'm going to go ahead and take out the pins, and we're going to overlap the batting. So as I lay the batting back down, what's going to happen though is if where it overlaps, it's going to be a little bit thicker. And that is actually what I want to avoid. That's why we're going to use a little bit of the interfacing. So we don't have to worry about having that overlapped batting. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to overlap it. Make sure it's laying nice and as flat as possible. You could iron this down as well if you wanted to. And then I'm going to take my scissors and I'm just going to cut both batting layers at once with them overlapped. Then wherever I cut, they should come in and fit right next to each other. Just make sure that you're only cutting the batting and not the backing. So I'm just trying to aim for basically right down the middle of where they overlap. Not doing a terrible clean job, but I'm gonna try to do a little bit better here. Let's see if I can get it. Then take out the extra pieces of batting. And then when they lay flat, there should be a lot less overlapping. If you need to go through, you can trim back some pieces if you find it, or just not worry too much about it. Got a little bit here that's, I think, stretched out a little bit on me. All right, so now they should lay nice and close to each other. And we're gonna take our strip of interfacing and I'm just gonna line it up and just sew it and just iron it right on top of that seam. Now this is ironed on, and you might wonder if that adds bulk to the quilt or changes the texture of it, and I haven't found that it does. I've been using interfacing to attach pieces of batting together to make bigger pieces of batting, scraps to make bigger things for years, and I've never had a problem with it. So make sure that you get the lightweight. If you get a heavier weight one, then you might end up with a problem. So now we just have to cover up that seam. So I'm going to take my sashing strip, and I want to make sure that I'm sewing on the not folded seam. I'm just going to line it up. See if I can back this up just a little bit. So I'm going to line it up along the edge of my block. Don't worry about this. This will get covered up when we do the in between the rows. So I'm just going to line it up, and I'm going to go ahead and sew a 1/4 inch seam all the way along this. I am going to be using a scant 1/4 inch seam. If you're not sure what that is, it just means a little bit smaller, just to make sure that when we get that fold of the fabric, this still reaches over and covers that side. So I'm going to use a scant 1/4 inch seam, line this up along this edge here, and sew the sashing onto the first side. So now that it's sewn on, we're going to go ahead and fold it over. If you want to, I'm going to go ahead and iron mine before I sew it so that it's got a nice flat seam, and then we're going to fold this under, and we're just going to sew right on top of this sashing. So we're going to make sure we're not sewing right on the edge, but really close to it so that you catch that 1/4 inch that we folded under in it as well. And then we're also going to sew right on top of this seam so that it matches. Now that we have it sewn on both sides so that it matches, we could technically be done, but I want to make sure that this quilt withstands the test of time. So I'm not going to trust just that interfacing, and I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to put a couple more seams down in here, and if you want to mark those out, you can do the same thing like we did before. Just use a ruler. So this is 2 inches, so I'm going to go ahead and put one in at 3/4 inches from this side, and then come in 3/4 inches from this side, and that's going to leave about a 1/2 inch in the middle. So with this little bit of a seam here, it should match up pretty close. So I'm just going to grab my butter knife and mark a line down, and then I'm just going to sew 2 straight lines down the middle of that as well. Now that this sashing is done and I have those extra seam lines in there, we're ready to go ahead and add the last one. So we're just going to make sure that we're adding it onto the right side of our block. So lining it up with the bigger ones on the top and on the right, lining up our 1 inches, and we're just going to repeat. So first thing I'm going to do is take just the backing fabric and sew those together with a 1/4 inch seam, and then press it to one side. Now that I've got that iron, I'm just going to go ahead and put the 2 batting pieces on top of each other, and then just trim off right down the center so that they line up next to each other. Now I'm going to go ahead and grab my interfacing and iron that on top to hold those edges down. Now we're ready to add the sashing. So go ahead and take the one piece with the not folded edge, line it up along the red one, and sew your 1/4 inch seam. We're almost done. We just have to go ahead and now fold that over. Go ahead and give this a nice press so it's laying nice and flat, and then sew about 1/8 of an inch in just inside the edge on both sides of our sashing. And now the final thing we need to do, and then we will be done, is just go ahead and mark out those 2 center lines and stitch 2 more lines down that sashing. We now have all 3 of our first blocks sewn together, and our top row is done. We are 1/4 of the way done with this quilt. So don't forget, if you go to the blog post, the link will be below the video. We'll have diagrams and layouts there as well to help you see that a little bit better if that helps you out. Also, if you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out. We're more than happy to answer those for you. You can also find us on Facebook and Instagram and see all the other projects that we're working on and see our new pattern that is so close to being done, if not out by the time this video posts. And we'll see you next time.